Mitch, we like to learn new skills, and we encourage other people to learn new skills, but sometimes that takes a lot of legwork.
Yeah, when I first got into needle felting, I had a tough time finding resources to learn it.
I know. So I thought we should record your process and finally do a video where you break down all of your go-to needle felting tools and materials and techniques.
Great idea.
All right, this first thing I know all about because I make a lot of the armatures for us out of aluminum wire.
Yeah, there are pros and cons to using an armature, and we'll talk about that. But they're a great way to give your figures support and the ability to put them in different poses.
Now, just to take the pressure off, there's no need for anyone to take notes during all of this because Michelle has written an extensive blog post about most of the stuff we're covering here and some that we're not.
Yeah.
And the link to that post is down in the description.
Right, but basically what I'm doing here is attaching some core wool to the armature. I mentioned earlier that there are pros and cons to armatures. One of the risks of using them is that you could break the needle on the wire.
Yeah.
So just be careful.
You know, as long as you're talking about needles, why don't you go over the ones that you use?
Okay. And remember, all of this is down in detail in that blog post, along with links to where you can purchase this stuff. This is called a 40T spiral because the shaft of the needle is twisted. That rough surface helps you shape and firm the wool quickly. These next two, the 40 star and the 38 star, are great to start with and cover a lot of ground. The numbers indicate the gauge of the needle. The higher the number, the more fine the needle. The 42T is a finer, triangle-shaped needle that is great for detail work and cleaning up fuzzies. And this is a 40T double needle, an all-purpose needle that, because it's two needles next to each other, can build up the wool quicker.
All right.
And I have the links to all of those in the post.
Okay, so here we've jumped ahead to the point where you can see the bunny's body.
Yeah, and that's all core wool.
Core wool?
Yeah, it's a basic wool that is easy to felt because of the way it's structured. Shorter fibers. And a lot of the colors I use are the same way. They're called bats of wool.
Right, but we couldn't find the color we wanted in those bats.
Right, that particular brown was only available as roving. And roving is made up of longer fibers, all combed in the same direction.
Like the flowing mane of a magical unicorn.
Sure.
Right?
But it's a little harder to prep. It takes a little longer to tear it up and randomize the fibers.
Yeah, but it works like a charm if you're making hair. I used it for my Jay figure, and his hair looked stunning.
It did look stunning, yeah. But that's the thing about the wool. Both kinds are good to use. They just feel a little different and require a slightly different process. So, it may be obvious, but hammering a needle towards your fingers over and over can sometimes result in you sticking your fingertips with a needle.
Yes.
Sometimes they just hurt and you move on, but other times...
She has the mark of the witch!
Yeah, exactly. So they make these thimbles you can slip on your fingers when you're felting.
Do they work?
Honestly, I couldn't get the needle through when I was trying.
Okay.
So they'd probably protect you from random pokes. Thing is, I don't use them because they feel a little awkward.
Like, how awkward?
Like, try to imagine drawing with winter gloves on.
Oh, that awkward.
Yeah, but if you're a beginner and if you want to try to protect your fingers, they might be worth a shot.
Sounds good.
Remember when I was telling you that there are pros and cons to using an armature?
Yeah.
And I said that sometimes you're going to bang the needle off the armature and that could break a needle?
Yeah.
This is what that's like.
Gah.
Yeah, it doesn't feel great either. But sometimes you just need an armature.
So we still have a bunch of tools and tips you want to go over, and the bunny is almost finished. What's up with fingers and toes?
I like to make individual fingers and toes. Takes longer, but it's easier to shape them and place them the way you want. You can make them by winding wool around the tip of a lollipop stick.
So what does that do? It shapes it into an appendage quicker?
Yeah, actually. But you can also just tear off some wool and start folding it in on itself, needle it down, and just shape it like that. Either way works.
As you're completing different parts of this rabbit, I feel like it's a good opportunity to talk about process and tools and this ear. You are flat felting it.
Yeah, basically tearing up some wool, laying it down on a mat or pad, and needling it to form a flat sheet of wool.
Right. And it's usually done on some sort of surface. I've been watching you learn this craft for years now.
Yeah.
And over the years, you've had different mats, different surfaces that you've worked on.
Yeah.
So in case someone wants to try this, what have you got to say about that?
Yeah, because there are a few options, and I've tried most of them. The first thing I went with were these brush felting mats. And the reason you need something like this is so that you have a surface that you can rest your project on that can take the needle without breaking it.
If you work on a tabletop, you might break off your needle on the table. But with brushes like this, the needle and your table are relatively safe.
Yeah. And brushes are fine, but I wanted to experiment with other surfaces.
Okay.
So I tried a foam felting pad.
Which is much bigger.
Yeah, it's a lot more space to work on, more room to rest your hand. The needle is still safe, but the downside of this is that the needle really does chew up that foam over time.
But you still use the foam mats.
I do, because I worked out a way to make them last a little longer. I put a sheet of acrylic felt on top of the foam, and that extends their life a little.
And that's just an inexpensive piece of synthetic wool that you can find at any craft store.
Yeah, but I'm always researching this stuff, and I found a new system that works really well for me. It's a thick wool mat I use as a base, with a smaller wool mat that sits on top. This is safe for the needle, safe for the table. The needle doesn't chew up the wool as much as the foam, and you don't get as much transfer of fibers from one project to another. I like this system, but they all work, and I put links to all these in my post.
So this is the part of the process where you rip out the eyes of the rabbit so he can't see the needle coming at him.
No, you did a really cute design on paper.
It looked cute.
It looked good on paper, but for whatever reason, the eyes just didn't translate.
I know.
So I made the call to redesign them, and it worked out much better.
And it's relatively easy to remove those because they're less structural, they're more cosmetic, and that's because we're nearly at the end here.
Yeah,
You got a few more tips about finishing up a sculpt like this?
I have a ton.
Good.
Let me show you something. These are my detail needles. They're a higher gauge than my other needles, and they can really help to needle in some of the little fuzzies and flyaways on the surface of the figure and smooth it out.
Right, and what? They're shaped so that they leave the smallest possible hole going in, and they don't pull out any fibers on the upstroke.
Yeah, but you can see they don't have those big, comfy plastic handles like my other needles.
Right.
Like I said, most needles come like this.
Okay.
You can work with them this way, but if you want a little something more to hang on to, you may want to look into needle holders. You can get needle holders that hold one needle or multiple needles.
For when you're bulking things up.
Yeah, and they're easy to use. They do give you a nice grip to hold on to.
All right, I know you still have a few more tool recommendations, but the rabbit is finished at this point. Let's take a look at how he turned out. Dr. Bunny is a consummate professional, top of her class, and she has very flexible hours.
She's a she.
Yes, she's a she. Yeah, doctors can be women, you caveman.
Okay.
And since the animals of the forest aren't bound by some draconian for-profit health insurance system, they can see the doctor whenever they need to without fear of forfeiting all the nuts they've stored away for winter. So are there any other tools or tips you have found to be useful when making projects like this?
Yeah, a couple. It's a good idea to have an awl.
An awl?
I have a couple different awls I use to make holes in the felted wool.
Yeah.
I use it if I'm going to add in plastic eyes or anything else that needs a little pocket to snug into.
I remember when I added a tail to my Jersey Devil, we used the awl to create a little space in the body to insert the armature wire of the tail.
Exactly. And it's always good to have a pair of scissors nearby.
Right.
They can widen any holes you make with the awl. They're good for cutting out big chunks of wool quickly, like if you need to slice a mouth into a felted head.
Right.
And they're great to clean up any fuzzies on the surface if the needle can't grab them.
Great. That's a pretty comprehensive list of tools and materials and techniques.
Yeah, I covered everything I could think of, but, there's always different ways of doing things.
Of course.
This is a good starting point, and like I said, I covered it all in pretty good detail in the blog post linked below.
Right, and I know you put a bunch of links in that post. Probably a good place to start if anyone wants to try needle felting. So if you hung on this long, thanks a lot for watching.
Yeah.
If you're interested in needle felting, I hope some of the things we talked about help you out with that. And thank you, Michelle, for taking the time to put together that post and gather those links.
Yeah, sure.
All right.
Okay.
Last word.
That's